Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and today we're going to talk about Dunston Dragons, and we're going to talk about what is really happening with Dunston Dragons. How is it impacting our world in these incredible ways? But there's no hard data evidence for how transformative Dunston Dragons has been for our world. So I want to talk to you about a recent report, a medical report that came out about Americans, and I want to talk about it in context of Dunston Dragons. All right, let's go. Okay. So report comes out. Report comes out. All right. JAMA, Journal of American Medical Association report, gives a report, okay? Here's what the report says. It says this plus, and I'm not going to give you the plus yet, right? It says, Black Americans who live in an area where there are primary physician doctors who are black, Black Americans who live in an area that have black primary physician doctors live longer. Oh, well, I guess, thank you. I think I could file that under duh, right? Like, if I'm black and then there are black, doctors to care for me, physical care, primary care doctors, and they live directly in my area and they're giving me help, duh, of course I'm going to live longer, right? Here's the plus. This is the interesting part. This is the fascinating part. This is where it gets good. Even if those doctors never treated you. What? Right? So if you are a Black American who lives in an area that has black, and specifically has black primary care doctors that never treated you, you live longer. Wait, what? That is fascinating and upsetting, right? Like, almost like, okay, the doctors are there, they just live there, they don't treat you, you never get, you don't actually get treated by them, but you still live longer. That's incredible, right? And that's the magic moment, right? By the way, I don't know if you know this, there was, so I read the book Freakonomics. If you haven't read that, it's an old book, but I think it's been updated, but it's phenomenal, right? And it's filled with like these hard, upsetting facts, right? One of the facts that was in Freakonomics that really upset people was like, they did a study and they found that, well, actually, Freakonomics talked about this study that had been done, and they found that if you were a kid, you were more likely to read better if there were books in your house, even if nobody read them to you, right? Like, so your parents have a bunch of books, they don't read them to you, you still read better, right? You still read better. That's incredible, right? Like, what? Where does that come from? This is what we're talking about with Dunston Dragons. Both of these studies, nobody knows why it shouldn't be this way, right? If there's just books in your house, right, and you read better, even though nobody read them to you, or if you're a black person living in America and there are black primary care physicians who live in your neighborhood, right, who live in your area, and they never treat you, you still live longer, right? That's astounding. That is incredible. How does that happen, right? Well, I'm going to tell you right now. It's patterns, right? The reality is, I believe we're reaching a point where science is still useful. It's mostly useful in products, right? But when we get to the point where culture is involved and we're trying to fix persistent problems, I think Gary Gygax created Dunston Dragons as a human flourishment tool in 1974, right? And when he did that, when he created this human flourishment tool in 1974, we reached this point where in my humble opinion, he never made it as a game. He disguised it as a game because he knew the world would never be helped by broccoli, right? Like, that's what psychology is. That's what self-help books are. They're like, hey, eat your broccoli. Nobody wants to read these suck books that are boring and horrible, and nobody wants to talk to somebody for $200 an hour who will actually answer your questions with questions and just wants to talk about your mother, right? But, and he was like, let's do something where people will come to the thing and engage with it. And I think that's why he built it as a human flourishment tool. And the ramifications of that is that, you now have two types of Dunston Dragons, right? People are like, oh, it's a game. I use Dunston Dragons to cut goblins in half. It's really fun. We have fun on the weekend. And then you have people who are like, I use Dunston Dragons as a tool. I use it to cut my own deficiencies in half. And it's a never-ending search of learning and wisdom and passion and love and truth, right? And so this is where the rubber meets the road. I can't tell you the exact science of why Dungeons and Dragons is transforming humanity, but I can tell you people are starting to say it and do it and be it, and it is becoming more obvious every day. Keys of Kymoria is literally a 5th edition game that is coming out that talks about therapeutic dungeon mastery, therapeutic game mastery. That's huge, right? And it is directly linked, it comes off of and it is compatible with the 5e. That's real. That's coming, right? Like, that's somebody saying, yeah, of course Dungeons & Dragons is a tool, right? Yeah, this is powerful, right? Or fantasy tabletop. Well, I think with Keys Kymoria, it's not officially connected to Dungeons & Dragons, but its genesis, in my humble opinion, is Dungeons & Dragons. So I think the logical extension is that Dungeons & Dragons can be used as a tool, right? And I think the idea with Keys to Kymoria is you would use the PHB, the DMG, and the Monster Manual, and then use this additional book to kind of like bring out the therapeutic ideas. Joe Manganiello literally just said, people are said, I'm talking to people who have, used Dungeons, who have been close to Dungeons & Dragons their whole life, and it has transformed their lives and the cultures they live in. That's astounding, right? So why? Where's the missing part, right? If you talk to either one of these groups that did this, information, they can't tell you why. Why on earth would somebody who never went to the doctor that lived in their area, why would they benefit from that doctor living in their area? Why would they literally live longer? There's no logical sense. There's no data that support it, right? Like, there's data to support the fact of it. There's no data to explain why, right? And this is the thing with Dungeons & Dragons, right? I think what's happening, what really happened with Dungeons & Dragons, more than anything, is Dungeons & Dragons established a path for light in a secular space, right? I'm an evangelical Christian, and I could tell you right now, like, somebody dedicating themselves, the light of Jesus is in, you go to my church, there's literally 150 people, and the light of Jesus is in their lives. And if you go into their home, if you see what they're doing throughout the week, you're going to see the love of Jesus right there, right? And they're very progressive, they're very kind, they're very tolerant, and you see all these things, all these good things come out of them. I think this is what Gary did. He is the first guy, right? He was not saved when he created Dunston Dragons. There's a lot of talk that he might have gotten saved when he was late in life, but when in his 20s, in 1974, when he dropped this thing, right, he wasn't saved. And there was no religious aspect of Dungeons & Dragons beyond the pantheons that were in the game, which gave an opportunity for people to interact with Dungeons & Dragons in a spiritual way. Theology is throughout. If you think I'm wrong, just read any edition of Dungeons & Dragons, and you're going to find pantheons that talk about theology in deep depth. Right? Spirituality is absolutely discussed within Dungeons & Dragons. So I think intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually, Dungeons & Dragons, based on Gary Gygax's initial release in 1974, and echoed and made more powerful in every edition since, and made most powerful in Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, what you're seeing the kindness, the tolerance, the progressiveness, the care for humanity, the desire to help coming out of Gary. You're seeing the light of Gary. And you see these dungeon masters who are spreading the light of Gary Gygax, right, every day. And Gary was incredibly kind, tolerant, and progressive, right? When he created Dungeons & Dragons, he's like, you could play whatever gender you want. You could play whatever preference you want. You are no longer bound to your identity, right? And he allowed this freedom of identity, right? And he's like, and I don't tell you what story to tell, right? I don't tell you to consume the story I've created. I've provisioned you to create your own powerful story, your own powerful narrative, right? And it's beautiful, right? And then last, I really feel like he said, let's talk about language. Language is crucial to the human spirit, and I'm going to give you new languages to talk about, and I'm going to inspire you to create new languages, which I think the first Dungeons & Dragons language has already been created, Scribeform. If you don't know what that is, link below, right? And it's astounding, right? Like, and I really feel the reason why Dungeons & Dragons is so hard to understand is there's these parts of our world where the reality just doesn't match any data we have, right? And the reality is, I really feel like Dunston Dragons is this thing, this secular thing that is telling people you are a world maker. And I will tell you right now, it was transformative. When I was 12 years old and I started, with the red box, and Dunston Dragons said, this is one world you live in. You'll make the rest. Right? And I've crafted entire worlds. I have determined the political, the politics, the currency, the pantheons. I've populated those worlds with a thousand hearts, 1,000 mouths, 1,000 minds. Right? I've stood on the shores of worlds I've created. I've stood on the shores of that other created, and I have memory, sensation, and emotion that are distinct. And I think the world is now filled with these powerful, good emanating dungeon masters who are transforming beyond the silliness of if everybody's having fun, you're doing it right, and saying if everybody's improving, you're doing it right. That's real Dunston Dragons, in my humble opinion. If everybody's improving, you're doing it right. And I'm no longer willing to accept this sad sack, low energy, copy energy, no energy, low energy, faux energy, just this surrender of fun is all that can be achieved with Dunston Dragons. I just don't believe it. I reject it with every cell in my being, right? And I call you to more. I call you to do more with your Dunston Dragons, to be more. And I also acknowledge you that if you're a true Dungeon Dragons dungeon master, you are powerful and you can change this world. And that's what Gary did. He gave a path to do good without religion. And I don't think that had ever been accomplished by anybody on this planet prior to Gary Gygax. And that's why Gary Gygax is the most important person he's the most important human, right? Jesus Christ upped him, did a whole lot better, and you should definitely be saved. But when it comes to doing good from a purely secular source, no one trumps Gary Gygax. There's never been a human on this planet who did more than Gary Gygax to help humanity, in my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion, when you get in the comments and send your traffic. Please consider liking and subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.